It is 2 minutes to the top of the hour, and this is the spotlight here on Lookuptv on the 17th day of July 2023. Now, a day when the opposition coalition, led by the leader of minority in the National Assembly, Opiyo Mbai, and Nairobi Senator Edwin Sifuna, have reiterated that the azimio anti-government protests scheduled for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday will continue or go on as planned. This is, of course, despite the rejection it faces from the government, and we've seen President William Ruto and, of course, the Interior Cabinet Secretary, that is Kitui, being very vocal and calling out the opposition coalition over those particular protests. Remember, the last round of the protest, which happened last week on Wednesday, got chaotic and deadly because at least 7 people lost their lives in that particular demonstration. Now, the court today again okayed those particular demonstrations after Martin Gitau headed to court to, of course, petition the High Court to stop those demonstrations. Now, the court today declined to stop those demonstrations. So, Wednesday, like Opiyo announced today, will be D-Day. And, of course, everybody has been flexing their muscles. All sides of the political divide, tough talking with Kenya on the side, saying we'll counter. Of course, we'll ensure that nobody's property is touched. As on the other side have said they will continue with their protest, and of course there's the blame game on who is destroying the property. Now, as do say that the Kenya Kwanza team, of course, hired goons to destroy property so that it would tarnish the name of an otherwise peaceful demonstration. Now, come Wednesday, looks like a game. Who Kenyans remain unsure will emerge victorious. But even as we talk about who will emerge victorious in that particular tussle, remember, at the end of the day, the question on the table will be who will bear the cost of the aftermath of these particular protests. Now, that and many more stories on our bulletin tonight. I am Ian Keitani, and our sign language interpreter is Josephine Auko. First of all, let's have a look at what's making headlines tonight.
And Friday this week are on.
Tonight on the Spotlight, the protests are on. Azimio reiterates on their 3-day planned protests amid the government's warning.
Do I look like assaulting anybody? I'm a pastor.
It wasn't me. Kitui East MP Nimrod Mbai denies assaulting a Kenya Power employee as he appears before EACC for grilling. And there is a free man. A Milimani court judge acquits Bishop Gilbert Dare of all 5 charges in a child theft case.
Now, remember, you can watch this particular bulletin across all our social media platforms at Lookuptv on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, as well as YouTube. We kickstart this bulletin on a political note, and Azimio One Kenya Coalition has come out to reiterate that the planned peaceful protests for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week will go on as planned. A parliamentary group meeting chaired by Azimio leader Raila Odinga called on President William Ruto to recall the Finance Act and lower the cost of living in order to end the planned protests. And as Juliet Chepkoech now reports, the MPs also called on the international community to look into the excessive use of force by police during these demonstrations.
Government and the opposition blaming each other over last week's chaotic anti-government demonstrations, and with another round of protest expected this week, the opposition, through the leader of minority Opiyo Mbai, now says the demonstrations will go ahead as planned, despite threats from the government, as it is their constitutional right to picket.
Protests will go on in line with Article 37 of our Constitution, which, as you all know, provides for freedom of peaceful assembly. Now, Kenya Kwanza claimed that protesters are being paid. Now, for anyone to claim that those protesters who came out in hundreds and thousands in places like Emali, Busia, Kitale, Kilifi, Kakamega, Machakos, and Nairobi, among other places, were paid is to be extremely insincere.
While castigating Interior CS Kitui Kindiki over orders to the police to ruthlessly deal with the protesters, Nairobi Senator Edwin Sifuna took a dig at President William RUTO over plans to use hired gangs to attack peaceful demonstrators.
We have received intelligence that in fact senior police officers in the Kenyan Police Command have chosen to ignore the illegal directive that was given by CS Kindiki for police officers to shoot protesters. And that is the reason why the president convened a PG, because he knows the police will not do his dirty work. He has now told his own members of parliament to mobilize people in their constituencies to come and harm protesters.
Opiyo Wandayi took a sweep at the government over the hiring of teachers while calling on President William RUTO to step aside for failing to implement his agenda as promised to Kenyans during the campaign period.
The government has hired some 55,000 teachers. Now, so what? Even the teachers are crying about the cost of living and high taxes and low salaries. Hiring teachers doesn't reduce the cost of living. Responsible leaders and regimes admit failure of their policies and quit in the interest of the nation. Don't ask us for solutions. Quit and pave way for a regime that has solutions.
Vihiga Senator Godfrey Osotsi also called for the United Nations to pay close attention to the excessive use of force by the police on demonstrators, while noting that the coalition is still following on the case filed at the International Criminal Court over the conduct of the police during anti-government demonstrations earlier this year.
The United Nations has pronounced itself on the situation in the country, especially on the issue of police brutality and the killings that went on during the demonstration. I want to state very clearly that the earlier petition by azimio to ICC is very active, and we want to encourage the United Nations and ICC to note the events of this week.
Despite President William Ruto strongly condemning anti-government protest, the Azimio la Umoja leaders have now stated the demonstrations will go on as planned, while also calling out police officers for use of excessive force. Juliet Chepkoech, Lookuptv.
Thank you very much, Juliet Chepkoech. Now, women leaders of Kenya through the ECO Network Africa have called on all leaders and Kenyans at large to maintain peace and sobriety as they carry out demonstrations, saying that the Constitution calls for personal responsibility and the need to safeguard the rights of other people. Speaking during a press conference, the women leaders appealed to the President, that is William Ruto, to protect the lives of all Kenyans and their property in line with the Constitution, which he swore to defend.
New gears itself for yet another round of protests this week. Women leaders of Kenya have come out to call for sobriety during the demonstrations. Through the ECO network, the leaders have called on the Kenyans and leaders to be responsible as they take on to the streets.
For dialogue so that we can build our economy and the nation together. While we appreciate that all Kenyans have a right to picket, demonstrate and assemble, we always remember that our constitutions provide that such actions